Hey everybody, welcome to another deep dive with us. Today we are going to crack open something pretty interesting, letter from the Apostle Paul.
Yeah.
But this isn't like your typical, Sunday sermon.
Hmm.
This is a personal plea,
Mhm.
and it is packed with emotion.
Oh, yeah.
And you guys know me. I
Yeah.
love a good story, especially one with a timeless message.
Yeah, for sure.
And so today we are diving deep into the book of Philemon,
Okay.
specifically verses 1 through 25.
All right. Sounds good.
So what's so different about this letter? What makes it stand out?
Well, I think one of the things that is really captivating about this letter is that it offers us such a unique window into the lives of early Christians and the difficult choices that they had to wrestle with. Because this letter is actually addressed to a specific person, a man named Philemon. And through this letter, we get to see how the teachings of Jesus were playing out in very real life situations.
Right. We're talking about real people like you and me,
Hmm.
wrestling with a situation that might even make us a little uncomfortable today.
Yeah.
It involves a runaway slave named Onesimus.
Right.
And get this, he's hanging out with Paul
Mm-hmm.
while Paul is under house arrest.
Yeah. And to really grasp the weight of that situation, it's important to remember the backdrop against which this is all happening. Slavery in the Roman Empire. It wasn't just some peripheral thing. I mean, it was completely woven into the fabric of society. We're talking about a system where people were seen as property, where, their humanity was denied. And this
Mhm.
wasn't some fringe belief. This was the norm.
Okay, so let's try to get a clear picture here. Okay, so we've got Paul, influential figure in early Christianity
Completely.
under house arrest, right?
Hmm.
And somehow he ends up crossing paths with Onesimus, a runaway slave. What happens next? I mean, do they just have a cup of tea and chat about the weather? I don't think so. What happened?
Yeah, you're right. Probably not tea. No, this meeting, it's anything but casual. It actually becomes a turning point in Onesimus's life because it's under Paul's guidance that Onesimus converts to Christianity. And the language that Paul uses to describe Onesimus after this conversion is really remarkable. He calls him my son in the faith, begotten in my bonds. And what he's doing there is emphasizing that their shared faith has created a bond as strong as any family tie, a bond forged during Paul's imprisonment.
Wow. Talk about a dramatic conversion story.
Yeah, it's powerful.
So, okay, now here's where it gets a little tricky.
Yeah.
Paul decides to send Onesimus back to Philemon, his owner,
Mm-hmm.
but not as a runaway. He is now a brother beloved,
Yep.
fellow Christian, deserving of forgiveness and a fresh start. And I mean, this wasn't just sending a letter. This was like dropping a bomb into Philemon's life.
You're absolutely right. I mean, think about it. Paul, even though he's imprisoned, he still holds significant authority as an apostle, as a leader in the early church. I mean, he could have just commanded Philemon to take Onesimus back.
Right. So why didn't he just lay down the law? What's going on here?
That is the question, isn't it? And that's precisely what makes this letter so fascinating. Instead of issuing a command, Paul takes this very different approach. He crafts this incredibly careful plea, one that is rooted in their shared faith and his deep, genuine affection for both men.
So he's kind of appealing to Philemon's heart rather than just his sense of duty. Is that kind of what's going on?
Exactly, and he does this so skillfully, throughout the letter. Paul strategically reminds Philemon of his reputation for love and generosity. He even praises him, using this very interesting phrase, for refreshing the bowels of the saints.
The bowels. Okay, I know language has, evolved over time, but
Sure.
what does that even mean? The bowels of the saints.
It does sound a little strange to our modern ears, doesn't it? But it's actually a metaphor. Think of it this way. Paul is acknowledging Philemon's deep compassion and care for his fellow Christians. It's like saying, hey, you're known for your kindness, for your willingness to help those in need. Ah, okay. So he's basically like buttering him up a little bit before he drops the big ask.
You could say that, but I think it's more than just flattery. Paul's really appealing to Philemon's best qualities, setting the stage for this really radical act of forgiveness.
And that act is accepting Onesimus back, not as a slave, but as a brother.
Precisely. I mean, those words that Paul writes, receive him, not now as a servant, but above a servant, a brother beloved. Imagine how those words must have struck Philemon.
I mean, this is going against everything that Roman society had taught him about slavery, right? I mean, to accept Onesimus as a brother would mean treating him with dignity and respect, recognizing his worth as a human being.
Right, and it would be a complete paradigm shift.
Mhm.
Paul is asking Philemon to see Onesimus through this new lens, the lens of their shared faith, and not through the societal norms that define the Roman Empire.
And Paul doesn't stop there, right? He even offers to personally repay any debts that Onesimus might owe.
I know, it's incredible. He's putting his money where his mouth is, right? Yeah. He's not just talking the talk, he is walking the walk.
Absolutely. And it's such a powerful example of the self-sacrificing love that Paul is encouraging Philemon to embody.
Okay, so we've got Paul, this incredibly respected leader, writing this incredibly personal and persuasive letter to Philemon, asking him to go against societal norms, forgive Onesimus, and offering to cover his debts. What's the catch?
Well, the catch is we don't know how Philemon reacted. The Bible doesn't tell us if he welcomed Onesimus back with open arms or if he, rejected Paul's plea entirely.
That is a huge cliffhanger. So how are we supposed to make sense of this letter? I mean, what was Paul trying to achieve here?
That's a great question, and I think to really understand Paul's intentions and the potential impact he was hoping to have on Philemon, we need to dig a little deeper into the letter's structure and language.
All right, I'm all ears. Let's see what Paul has up his sleeve.
Okay. One of the things that strikes me about this letter is just how skillfully Paul uses language to persuade Philemon. He doesn't just present the facts. It's more than that. It's like he's weaving together emotion and logic.
Ooh, I like that. A tapestry of emotion and logic.
Yeah.
So he's appealing to both Philemon's head and his heart.
Exactly. And he does this right from the start. Like, look at how he addresses Philemon with so much warmth and affection, calling him dearly beloved, fellow laborer. He even includes greetings to Apphia, who is likely Philemon's wife, and Archippus, who may have been another leader in their house church.
So he's really establishing this sense of community and shared faith from the get-go. Kind of like, hey, we're all in this together, right?
Precisely. It's such a clever tactic because it subtly reminds Philemon of their common ground before he even brings up the, well, kind of sensitive topic of Onesimus. It's like he's creating this foundation of goodwill, almost disarming Philemon before he makes his really bold request.
Setting the stage, you could say, for Philemon to see Onesimus not just as this runaway slave, but as someone who's connected to their community of faith.
Exactly. And then he does this really brilliant thing. He subtly reminds Philemon of all his good deeds. He praises his love and generosity. You know, that phrase we talked about earlier, refreshing the bowels of the saints.
Ah, yes. Bowels again. A compliment, right?
Absolutely. It's a metaphor. It signifies this deep compassion and care. He's acknowledging Philemon's reputation for kindness. It's like saying, you're a good guy, known for your generosity. Now I'm going to ask you to extend that same grace to Onesimus.
Makes so much more sense. So he's kind of nudging him gently towards seeing Onesimus in this new light through the lens of his own compassionate nature.
Right. And remember, he's writing all this while under house arrest. He's physically limited, but his words are doing some heavy lifting here, reshaping Philemon's understanding of Onesimus.
Yeah, it's like he's painting this new picture of Onesimus, highlighting the transformation, the potential, to really be a valuable member of their community.
Exactly. And he does this by directly addressing the elephant in the room, that Onesimus was unprofitable before, but is now profitable to both Paul and, by extension, to Philemon. And he links this transformation to Onesimus's conversion experience.
So he's making a direct connection between faith and positive change. It's not just about Onesimus being a better worker. He's a changed man because of his newfound faith.
Exactly. It's a fundamental shift in his character and his identity. Paul is showing Philemon that there's more to Onesimus than meets the eye. He's urging him to look beyond the past and see the potential for this new future.
It's fascinating how he manages to weave all these threads together. Philemon's good character, Onesimus' transformation, their shared faith, all to create this compelling argument for forgiveness and reconciliation.
And remember, he could have just said, Philemon, you have to forgive Onesimus. End of story.
Right.
But instead, he does something pretty amazing. He appeals to Philemon's free will. He says, I would do nothing without thy mind, that thy benefit should not be, as it were, of necessity, but willingly.
Wow, that's powerful stuff. He's not trying to force Philemon's hand. He's inviting him to make a choice that could transform not only Onesimus' life, but Philemon's own heart. It's about choosing to act out of love, not obligation.
Exactly. It's not about following rules. It's about embracing a deeper understanding of what it means to live out your faith, to extend grace, even when it's incredibly difficult.
So he's making a pretty bold statement about the transformative power of forgiveness here. But he doesn't stop there. He goes even further by offering to personally repay any debts that Onesimus might owe. I mean, he's really putting his money where his mouth is.
Yeah, it's an incredible act of self-sacrificing love, and one that he's urging Philemon to show as well. He's leading by example, showing him what true Christian love looks like in action.
Okay, so we've got Paul, this powerful figure, making this heartfelt plea for Philemon to do something that, let's be honest, would have been radical in Roman society.
Hmm.
He's using every tool in this rhetorical toolbox to paint a picture of a transformed Onesimus, worthy of forgiveness, worthy of brotherhood. But how does he wrap this letter up? Does he just, like, drop the mic and walk away?
Not quite. The ending is actually just as interesting as the beginning. Because Paul expresses this complete confidence in Philemon's obedience. He even says, knowing that thou wilt also do more than I say. He's appealing to Philemon's desire to please God, to go above and beyond.
Like, I know you're a good guy, Philemon. You're going to do the right thing, and then some. Pretty savvy.
It is, and then he throws in this almost casual little note. He says, but withal prepare me also a lodging, for I trust that through your prayers I shall be given unto you. He's anticipating his release from prison and looking forward to visiting Philemon in person.
Oh, that's interesting. It's almost like he's saying, hey, I can't wait to see you face to face and celebrate the reconciliation that I believe is going to happen between you and Onesimus. Yeah. Ending on this really hopeful, almost anticipatory note just adds another layer of complexity to the letter.
Absolutely, because it shows that Paul isn't just concerned with Onesimus's fate. He's invested in Philemon's spiritual growth, the flourishing of their relationship. This little letter is packed with so much depth, so much nuance. It's about forgiveness, reconciliation, and this radical transformation that can happen when we choose to love the way Christ loved us.
Okay, yeah, I'm starting to see why this letter has resonated with people for centuries. It's a powerful story about forgiveness, about second chances. But let's be real for a second. We don't actually know how Philemon reacted to Paul's letter. The Bible leaves us hanging.
It's true. We're left with this open question. But the fact that this letter was preserved and included in the New Testament, it suggests that early Christians saw it as something really important. Maybe even as this model for navigating those tricky intersections between societal expectations and the radical demands of their faith.
Right, so even though we don't know the ending of Philemon and Onesimus' story, the letter still has a lot to teach us about forgiveness, reconciliation, and the power of seeing each other through this lens of faith.
And those are themes that are just as relevant today, right? Think about it. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to forgive someone who really wronged you? Or maybe you were the one who needed forgiveness? This ancient letter gives us this framework for dealing with those really tough emotions and relationships.
I think that's what makes this deep dive into Philemon so compelling. It's not just an ancient story, it's a reflection on human experiences that we still grapple with today. Brokenness, redemption, the power of love and faith.
And it challenges us to examine our own biases, our own assumptions, to consider how we might be called to extend grace and love to those who society might label as unprofitable or undeserving. It pushes us to ask ourselves, what would it look like to really embody the kind of radical love and forgiveness that Paul modeled in his letter to Philemon?
That's a great question to ponder. And on that note, I think it's time for us to start wrapping up this deep dive. This deep dive into Philemon, it's really got me thinking about how easily we can fall into this trap of labeling people, based on their past or where they stand in society.
Yeah, I think that's a really powerful insight, and it really connects back to what we were talking about with Paul's letter. I mean, we have to remember that slavery in the Roman Empire, it was brutal. People were considered property, no rights, no protections. To even think about treating a slave as an equal, let alone a brother, it was completely radical. It would have been unheard of at the time.
Yeah, it's mind-blowing to even try to wrap our heads around that kind of dehumanization today. So when Paul asks Philemon to see Onesimus as a brother, he's not just asking for a change of heart. He's asking him to challenge, like, the very foundation of Roman society.
Exactly. I mean, this request wasn't just unconventional, it was revolutionary. It challenged the power structures of the Roman world at its core.
Yeah, and that makes me appreciate Paul's approach even more. He doesn't attack Philemon. He doesn't condemn him for owning slaves. Instead, he appeals to his better nature, his compassion, his faith. It's a much more subtle and I think potentially more effective strategy.
Yeah, it's this really masterful blend of persuasion and respect. Paul, he recognizes the complexity of the situation while at the same time pointing towards a higher ideal. This vision of a community where love and grace can break down even the most deeply ingrained social barriers.
So even though we're looking at this ancient letter dealing with this very specific situation, the themes, they're still incredibly relevant today, right? Forgiveness, reconciliation, challenging social norms. These are things we're still grappling with.
Oh, absolutely. We might not be dealing with slavery in the same way, but we all encounter situations where we are called to extend grace and forgiveness to those who have hurt us, to see past superficial differences and recognize the inherent dignity and worth of every human being.
Think about it. How often do we make snap judgments about people based on how they look, their job, their background? How often do we let these prejudices, these preconceived notions, cloud our judgment?
It's a constant battle, isn't it? And Paul's letter to Philemon, it serves as such a powerful reminder that we are called to something so much greater, to a kind of love that transcends all those social divisions and seeks reconciliation and restoration.
This deep dive into Philemon has been really eye-opening for me. I mean, it's challenged me to really think about forgiveness, second chances, the courage it takes to stand up for what's right, even when it means going against the grain.
It reminds us that faith isn't just about what we believe, it's about how we live it out, about transforming our relationships and building a world that's more just and compassionate.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Hmm.
Well, on that note, I think it's time for us to wrap up this deep dive. But before we go, I want to leave you with this one final thought. Imagine you were Philemon and you received this letter from Paul. How would you respond? What would it take for you to truly see Onesimus not as a slave, but as your brother, deserving of forgiveness and a new beginning? It's a tough question, but it's one worth wrestling with, don't you think? Because maybe, just maybe, it can lead us to a deeper understanding of our own faith and our own role in building that more just and loving world. Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.